When we walk around in a park or in a garden, we see a lot of biodiversity. And so the biodiversity that is hidden in the soil seems like probably insignificant. How much biodiversity can there really be in soil? Well, this is not an entirely new question, and the traditional answer to that question has been, well, there is maybe about a quarter of life on this planet in the soil, which when you think about it, that's a lot, given all the stuff that we can see above ground. But this was actually an estimate just for the animals, and it's just kind of been taken over for an estimate of biodiversity overall on this planet. And while 25% seems astonishing for an estimate of all of the biodiversity on the planet, all the species on the planet, there's a recent paper by Anthony and co-workers that provided a completely new estimate. So if you want to estimate the number of species on the planet, you have a lot of technical issues. I mean, for once, you have to deal with a variety of different ecosystem types. In addition to soil, you have fresh water, you have the ocean, and you have everything above ground that you need to account for in your estimate. On top of that, you have a lot of technical challenges, starting with the definition of what a species is in the first place, because that differs a lot between different organism groups, like let's say animals, and then things like bacteria, viruses, and fungi. And also the methods that you use to assess biodiversity are going to be vastly different among these different organism groups, and many times this is based on DNA. Regions that you sequence. Also, the definition of what exactly is a soil inhabiting species is also not entirely straightforward, but it can be done. So what the authors of this paper did is they went through all these different organism groups and they tabulated the number of species for the different components of the Earth system, the soil, and then basically everything else. And as you might imagine, these estimates come with a lot of uncertainty because for a lot of organism groups, we don't even know how many species there really are. Microorganisms, for example. Nobody knows how many species of fungi there really are. So of course, these estimates and tabulations come with a fair amount of uncertainty. And what's best about this paper is how well the authors really dealt with that level of uncertainty. And we're quite open about the uncertainty of these estimates that in some cases are quite large. But taking into account all these estimates of uncertainty and making this tabulation of all the different organism groups and the different components of the Earth, they came up with a rather astonishing result. Namely, that almost 60%, so definitely more than half, of all the species on Earth actually are in the soil. And that's quite astonishing. It's quite a bit more than the previous estimate, more than double the previous estimate. And it really makes you think. When we think about biodiversity, we think of all the stuff that we can see above ground, and it's a lot. And it's hard to accept that 60% of all biodiversity, not even in systems like this, but including the oceans, is going to be in the soil. Which means, and this hasn't been really done in the study, but I think by extrapolation, it's not a huge leap of faith to say that in any given ecosystem, if you look around here, there's going to be more species in the soil than what you see above ground. And that is remarkable. What does that really mean? The most obvious consequence is that we need to be nice to our soils. We need to take good care of them because they harbor the dominant part of biodiversity on this planet. So it simply doesn't do to disregard them and to exploit them and to degrade them through a number of things that we do currently as humanity. So that is maybe one of the strongest arguments to really preserve soil. Another important point is when we talk about biodiversity, communicate about biodiversity, we usually show the stuff around us. It's beautiful, it's easily accessible, it's charismatic, it's cute, you can touch it, you can see it, you can smell it, you can enjoy it with your senses. And it's easy to forget that the real biodiversity is in that soil underneath us, and it's not as spectacular because most of that biodiversity is microscopic, so you can't even see it. Without the help of a microscope, you cannot really experience it in very many ways, and that makes it so difficult also to communicate about soils, because it is not so easily demonstrable as just look around and see the beauty of the system here. It's much more challenging in the soil. Therefore, it's easily forgotten. And I've been to many meetings where people talked about biodiversity and the soil didn't even come up. It was all about plants and animals. And I think that paper really helps us put everything in perspective. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye.